Sheros. Look at the arrow. He can teleport.
He's gonna stop it. He's stopped him.
Pyramids, but there's no more play. Stewie's won the round. We're going to overtime.
This is Rocket League. Up for Ryu. Oh, look at the cleanse. Look at the moves. Faker. What was that?
Just like traditional sports, a good esport has a habit of creating moments, what they look up on YouTube years later to relive. This feedback loop is what developers look for to extend the life cycle of their game. Where previously, companies would just make their game and move on to the next project, it's now standard practice to have a post-launch team that pumps out regular updates and tweaks to keep the game interesting. Developers have found it much more successful to retain loyal players than to garner new players on a new game. The tricky part, however, is getting that loyalty. The way to get loyalty like this includes, but is not limited to, making a game that jerks their demographics so hard that no other game gives them the same euphoric gamergasm and will spend the rest of their lives coming back to it while helplessly searching for that same high in other games. Games like Factorio and The Witcher 3 being notable titles of this. Another way is releasing a game that's good but doesn't have that spark that keeps people playing years later, but rather ditching it for a new IP. You stick to your guns and fix the bugs or problems with your game, and after years of patches, tweaks, buffs, nerfs, and changes, you come out with an extremely polished and tight game, and based off of sheer word of mouth, or like Shroud decides he likes your game or whatever and gains a dedicated following again. Think of games like Rainbow Six Siege and more recently Minecraft. And the last way we'll talk about is the esports route. Game devs look at games like League of Legends and CSGO and think, oh, if we just throw money at an esports scene for our game and it catches on, we hit two birds with one stone. We create another channel of revenue for our game and also extending the life cycle. Well, yes, that's a strategy that works for some games, it isn't some magic formula that solves all your problems. What these game companies often gloss over is the fact that just because your game has a competitive multiplayer does not mean it's capable of being an esport, and chief offenders of this are battle royales, and the chiefest of chief offenders is Fortnite. So the big question is, what does it take to have a successful esport? I don't think there's a definitive answer to this. The crowd's attached to what they attach to. However, what we can do is look at the similarities in mainstream esports and compare what they all have in common. These aren't the be-all end-all of esports success, but it gives you a pretty good guideline. The first item on our list, Fortnite does extremely well. The whole game is designed to streamline the process of queuing for another match. Dying is instant and you're immediately given the big run at the back button, and you're in the next game in less than a minute. Thumbs up, Epic. Before I can go any further, we need to talk about a little thing called high ground advantage. In any shooter, high ground is king, because when you're aiming down at someone, two things happen. First, you're covering more of your character so that the opponent has a smaller target to hit, and the second is that when you're looking down at a player, you're more likely to hit the head. Now, in a traditional shooter, maps are designed for players to fight for high ground by putting objectives around to create a struggle for a stationary location. This formula changes in a battle royale game because the map is massive, and the playable area moves as the game progresses, so holding high ground is kinda pointless when it's just gonna be gone in a couple of minutes. In Fortnite, high ground advantage is just created out of your pocket. It's a really smart game mechanic that's super clean, super fast, and you can never be the perfect builder. So the first step in creating Fortnite into a successful esport? Check. Don't worry, it gets worse from here. If you're a developer in which players compete in your video game as their job, consistency within your game should be pretty high on the list of priorities. Many of the big current esports do patches and tweaks for their game, and that's great. It can keep the game from stagnating, but Epic Games takes this notion and puts it into hyperspeed. If Epic really wants their esports scene to succeed, and I'd put about 100 million on that they do, they need to let their employees rest and pull back the reins on the new shit that comes out every week. Doing this allows for the pros to get creative with the items and weapons that they are given, and we get to see legendary plays like this.
He's not seeing them. I have no idea why. I think he must have been looking at somebody else's monitor just in that second. It can't get worse than this, surely. Olofmeister is still waiting. The patience game coming out. He can spot them coming out of Squeak Door as well. He's here. He sees them down there. Straight headshot. They have no idea. Smith's looking confused and dazed, and there's going to be a follow-up headshot. Olofmeister, you've got to be kidding me. He takes down Hiroshima as well. Oh, it fucked up all
all season, and he pulls it off here in the most clutch moments.
The player to invent the shot himself is able to get the delayed front flip and just destroy Method on defense.
What is this?
What are they doing right now?
That is interesting.
That is a really...
You get over the roof there?
Oh my.
Oh
my, what a play, what a grab!
Tosses in the ground, they're gonna make it work, and Cruz taken out by the ensuing self-destruct.
We're going to step away from the developer side of this and talk about the actual broadcast of the game. A broadcaster's job is to provide the best viewing experience for the game as possible. They're doing their job right if you never notice it, providing information that lets the viewer understand the state of the game while giving the most omniscient perspective possible. This, in my opinion, is the most important reason Fortnite falls short of esports glory. Traditional sports have had this lockdown for a while now. When you're watching, I don't know, let's say you're watching like handball during the Olympics. Even though you have no idea what the rules are, you can still figure out who's winning, who's losing, and as you watch, you start to get the general idea of how the game is played. And the biggest esports also have this pretty much down. Everything's laid out for you while giving enough real estate on the screen for the actual game. Fortnite, as well as other battle royales, really just have way too much going on. It's impossible to keep track of 100 players all on one giant map. It's just not possible. Someone's favorite player can be eliminated and the casters won't even mention it because of the action taking place on screen. We'll often focus on one player's perspective and we miss everything else that's happening outside of that one player's viewpoint. It's just a mess. The early game in Fortnite is just scanning the kill feed hoping your favorite player doesn't go down. And if they do, what's the point of watching until the next game starts? The way Fortnite is designed doesn't allow for spectators to watch with ease and has simply too many players and things for a broadcast to keep track of. Now, I can talk about the in-game mechanics and developer mistakes all I want, but when it's all said and done, an esports producer only cares about one thing. Is the game fun to watch? And for Fortnite, the answer is no. When the end goal of a game is simply to be the last one alive, defensive play is now the optimal strategy. So in the late game of any battle royale, in a tournament scenario which every player is at their best in taking the highest percentage play, why in the world would anyone want to fight unless absolutely necessary? Like, a perfect game in a battle royale tournament would be staying alive and have to kill the final player. Now, you may be saying, kills count towards your score in tournaments so it'll reward more aggressive play. And while that is true to an extent, that's not a perfect solution. I see kill incentives as like a crappy band-aid to a much larger problem. What if in basketball you got 3 points for dunking the ball, or in football you got an extra point when you got an interception? It strays away from the core of the game, and the core of the game of battle royales is survival. And survival to the spectator is boring. If I had to give a parallel to Fortnite from traditional sports, it'd be golf. It's got team tournaments, but people only care about the solo matches. It's got giant prize pools, but less viewership than its more popular competitors. It only gets exciting at the very end, and most people, when they watch it, end up falling asleep and just watching the highlights on YouTube.